My name is Yuan Lee. I am a 15-year-old hookup girl, and this is the story of how I almost died meeting a snake man. It was another Saturday evening when my sister's friend, Chidinma, came into our house. She was holding a new iPhone and dressed in expensive new clothes. She came to see my sister, and they started discussing. Talking about how her previous night had gone. She was showing my sister the politicians she met and the luxurious cars and houses she entered. I couldn't stop myself from listening, so I joined them in the conversation and looked at the pictures and videos on her phone. After the conversation continued, she kept on talking about how she made over 90 million naira only on one night and started advising my sister not to be stupid and better follow her to change her life. My sister only smiled, telling her we were more than okay. But she was lying because we weren't living okay. We were raised by a single dad after our mom left us years ago. And after our father married a new wife, he left us also and traveled to another state, leaving me and my elder sister. We survived on my elder sister's monthly 80,000 naira income from the factory where she works. This was barely able to feed us and take care of my schooling. After Chidinma had left, I spoke with my sister inquiring about why she didn't want to follow her friend to those money-making parties, but she only smiled at me, telling me I shouldn't sell my body for short-term pleasure. The new week arrived and I headed to school as usual. After school was over around 2 p.m. The teachers came and sent the people who hadn't paid for extra lessons out, and I was one of them. I angrily walked out of the class and started heading home as fast as possible, because leaving early would be beneficial to me. As I trekked with hunger and munching on my snacks through the streets, I suddenly heard my name. I looked back and saw a black luxurious SUV headed towards me. As it got closer, I saw it was Chidinma inside. She asked me to come inside and asked why I was walking alone. I got into the car and saw the luxury it contained. Chidinma was there sitting with a young man and a driver, and I sat close to Chidinma because I was scared of sitting next to a strange man. I explained everything to her, and she offered me the food she had just got from a restaurant I ate, and when I arrived at the bus stop on my street, the man stretched out an envelope to me and told me that it was for my school, and also because I was a beauty. I was skeptical, but Chidinma smiled and put the heavy envelope in my bag. I eagerly went home, and when I arrived I checked it and saw stacks of money inside. I was happy and scared at the same time, and waited for my sister to arrive after she did. I showed her the money and told her what happened, and she seemed angry but happy at the same time. She told me not to trust Chidinma, and she collected the money and counted it. It was 2 million nairas. That night, my sister bought food from a restaurant, which I enjoyed very much, and for the next few weeks, everything felt like heaven in the house cause we had more than enough, and I started getting scared that we would go back to the hungry way we used to live when the money finishes. On a Saturday evening, I decided to go see Chidinma at her place to thank her for the money her friend gave me. As I entered the house, I met the same man who gave me the money. I was scared and my heart jumped in my chest. I stuttered as I greeted him. He smiled at me and asked how I was. I asked him about Chidinma, and he said she was taking her bath. I thanked him for the money and wanted to leave, but he called me back and asked me to come to sit beside him. I was scared, but I went towards him and sat. He asked if I had a phone, which I told him I didn't. As we were talking, Chidinma came to him and saw me. She asked what I was doing, and I explained the reason for my visit. After a few minutes, both of them started talking about how beautiful I was and that I shouldn't waste my beauty like my sister. I told them I was scared of parties, but they advised me not to be. The man told me the same thing Chidinma does was the same thing he does. He hangs with sugar mummies and they give him huge sums of money and he doesn't even have to do anything with them, and they could teach me also how to do it safely. Chidinma advised me to follow them that day, and I skeptically agreed since they ensured my safety. I followed them to a club party that evening, and I discovered the lifestyle and how they earn money from the rich when I got back home late that night. I explained to my sister everything and she got very angry. I told her I could do the business without selling myself, and we got into a heated argument. She told me if I wanted to live that life, then I would have to sponsor myself from that night, and I agreed. Since then I started following Chidinma to the parties and started making money for myself. I learned ways to prevent myself from being abused by rich men, and I became very good at it. I used many things like my psychopath, contacting their wives, and STD test results to prevent anything when the men started demanding for anything under my skirt, and I became very good. I was making millions every night party. My sister kept advising me, but I only showed her the money I was making and reminding her none of the men had touched me, until that terrifying Tuesday night. As usual, Chidinma called me around 8 p.m., but I felt uneasy and tired, having feelings that didn't want me to go. She told me the wealthiest men in the state were coming to that certain exclusive party, and it would be multiple millions I would be taking home on a single day, so I reluctantly decided to follow her. We arrived at a very huge mansion and our Uber drove in. There we met fat, wealthy-looking men sitting on different large seats with a few dancers. Some things felt off about the party. It was tense and slightly quiet. It wasn't done in the usual way. As I and Chidinma walked in, a man suddenly called Chidinma, and she quickly ran to him. Sitting on his legs and waving to me, I was scared and anxious as I walked in, and before I could find an empty seat, a man suddenly pointed to me, gesturing for me to come towards him. I walked shyly, and he smiled, looking at me. I sat beside him, and he continued smiling weirdly at me. "You look new here," he said, and I nodded fearfully. Then he started touching my legs while licking his lips. My heart was pounding heavily, but I couldn't do anything but smile. He stood and told me to follow him, which I fearfully did, turning to look at Chidinma, who was smiling at me. Before I knew it, we were in a room. We got inside, and he locked the door immediately, which only made my heart beat even faster. This felt very scary for reasons I couldn't understand. He told me to take off my dress as he was losing his belt, and I smiled and acted professional and confidently. "You would have to pay before you see anything, Oga," I said, trying to force a smile, but he only stared at me eagerly. He told me he would do that when he was done, and I quickly came up with my other safety measures. I told him I would need to shower to make myself clean for him, and he agreed. I took out my fake HIV result and put it on the bed beside my bag and headed to the bathroom, hoping he would read it. I took my time well in the bathroom, and when I finally came out, I saw the paper torn to pieces on the floor and the man sitting menacingly beside the bed. "Even if you have HIV and Ebola, we are doing what we came here for," he said, and he pulled down his trousers, and what I saw made me scream like my life was about to end. A snake was in the middle of this man's leg, a living one which curled up by itself and hissed as it stared at me. I started screaming and running to the corners of the room, screaming on top of my lungs, but he only kept coming towards me. The snake also continued hissing and biting like it wanted to attack and eat me, and I started crying and begging for help. I was almost peeing on my body. Crying and begging for help? I was almost peeing on my body. As the man got closer to me, then my phone suddenly rang. The man turned to it and picked it up. Then he cut the call. "Your sister is not going to save today, little child," he said. And I screamed out loudly, even more remembering all the warnings of my sister playing in my head. I leaned on the wall and bent down, putting my head in between my knees, covering my face as the man got closer. Soon, with tears running down my eyes and my heart drumming for help, I felt the snake hissing in my ears, its tongue leaking down from my head to my shoulder. I thought to myself, "It is finished," and started praying. Then I looked at my feet and discovered I was still wearing my high heels, and with the last courage I had in me, I carefully took it off. As the man carried me up, I summoned the strength, and I hit him very hard with all my energy on his head, with my heel shoe, and the snake hissed loudly and angrily bit my leg. He dropped me screaming in pain as I quickly ran to the shelf and took the keys. I quickly opened the door and ran out as fast as possible while he was still screaming in the room. I ran out with a bleeding leg and managed to find my way out of the building. I ran out and got to the main road, where I miraculously saw a bike rider approaching. I stopped him and told him to take me to the hospital, which he hastily and helpfully did. When I arrived at the hospital, they gave me a series of injections and medication to prevent the venom from spreading, and in a matter of minutes, I was unconscious. When I woke up, I saw there's some doctor standing next to me. They asked about the snake that bit and inquired about it. They say they had never seen anything like it before Nigeria, and it was a miracle to be alive. But I couldn't explain, and only asked to call my sister. When my sister arrived and I saw her, I started crying, and she also started crying, running to hug me. She told me she had been praying for me since the previous night, and I just held her close to my chest. I explained everything that happened to her, and she cried as she listened. I vowed that day to never to go to club parties, and I started living a normal life. The moral lesson of this story is for us to remember that not everything that glitters is gold. Not every sugar daddy has sugar. Some have hanging snake ready to eat you for lunch. Remember, your life is more valuable than any kind of dangerous lifestyle you want to live.